All right, we're just going to do a handout today. You guys, you watch the video, that's it, no homework questions. They're not actually getting a handout. I'm just doing some reading. We're going to have a class discussion. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it actually, goes somewhere. All right, we'll see. Okay, and my glasses are going to steam up again. I really don't have to put on that thing. All right, we're talking about daily life on the frontier, okay? I can relate to some of this, although it wasn't the frontier. I did grow up kind of similar to some of these circumstances as far as the work that was done on a farm and things like that. The house I grew up in was built by, it was actually built by my grandfather. It was four rooms and a kitchen, a little kitchen on the back of it. So I can relate to some of this, not as hard as these people had it, but I can relate. Okay? The daily life of people living on the frontier was filled with hard work and difficulties. Once a farmer cleared the land, built a cabin and a barn, and planted his crops, he still had a lot of chores that needed to be done every day. Okay? In order to survive, the entire family needed to work. And each day, the settlers would wake up with the sunlight and work until sundown. And if you've got animals and crops and things like that to take care of, when it says every day, it means every day. It means 7 days a week during planting season and looking at. And if you've got animals, that's an everyday thing. Okay, I grew up. We had a couple of milk cows and things. You could not take a day off from milking those cows. You had to get up every morning, go down and milk the cows every morning. You had to milk the cows every evening then, okay? 7 days a week, 365 days. It didn't matter Christmas, Thanksgiving, didn't matter. You had to take care of your animals, okay?
Don't milk cows, don't their udders burst if you don't?
Yeah, if you don't take care of them.
If you don't milk them, then they'll burst.
Yep.
Wait, then how do they survive wild? Like in the wild?
How many cows do you see wandering around in the woods where you live?
There's really any wild cows.
I think he means like before,
Yeah, before we made them.
Well,
they're bred animals. They were bred.
Yeah, these are bred for this.
Yeah, the milk cows were bred.
Yeah. One of the first things a farmer needed to do was to build a barn and a cabin. The barn was important to keep the animals safe from the wolves and other predators. It also stored farming tools and grain. Typically, the barn and the cabin was made from logs in a fashion that didn't need nails. If you ever see the way they built log cabins and things, they would cut out a piece of it and stack it. If you ever play with Lincoln logs,
yes.
Yeah, that same thing, same concept. Okay, same concept. And because of that, the gravity, the weight held everything in place then. Okay. Planting the seeds on a big farm took a lot of work. First, the farmers would need to plow up the field with a large plow, pulled by a horse or an oxen. Next, he would scatter the seeds throughout the field. And finally, he would have to use the oxen to drag dirt back over the top of the seed. Okay? We used to do the same thing, except we didn't have to use a horse. We actually did have a tractor by the time I came along. But you did. I remember when we got a 4 plow, it had 4 ends to it that would turn the dirt. Man, we thought we were big time.
But someone had to go
having
back
1 or
there.
2, yeah. But then, once you plowed it up, you went and you planted the seeds or the plants, depending on what you were planting. Tobacco we always had the plants that you put in, okay? Because you had what they called plant beds, and you actually would start growing those January, February. You would start growing the beds of the plants, and you covered them with plastic and all to protect them from the cold and the weather and all that stuff. And then when they matured a little bit, you would go and plant them in your field, and then they would grow. And that's how it was done. But we thought we were big time. But once you did that, then you had to go back. You could run your disc and cover it all back up again, to put dirt around it. Or if you didn't have a disc, somebody with a hoe had to come down through there and do it by hand. Okay. Women had their jobs and worked hard too. In many cases, of course, the farmers in the fields during planting and harvest time, they would work in the fields with their husbands. People back in these days would have large families. Okay? My mother was one of 10. My dad was one of 9. Okay, my mom came from a farming family, and they grew up from the time they were old enough to go to work. They went to work on the farm. My dad's father ran a sawmill, so he was the same way. By the time he was old enough to go to work, he started working in the sawmill. In fact, when he was drafted in World War II, I had his paperwork where he was drafted, and he had to fill it out. And they put him down. His civilian occupation was log turner. It was his job that when it came down through and made the first cut with a big saw,
Yep.
he had these things that he put on it, and he had to turn it. Remember I told you my dad was one of the strongest men I've ever seen, ever met. I mean, he was only like 5'7", 160 pounds. But pound for pound, he was the strongest guy because he did that his entire childhood until he was drafted into the Army, and then he came out of the Army and he learned how to be a mechanic.
And farm.
And he farmed, and he constantly was working with his hands and his arms. And he was undoubtedly the strongest man I'd never lifted a weight in his life. He didn't have to. He was country strong, as we used to call it. Yeah.
What about
Yes,
your
sir.
brother?
What age did they usually work at?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I started working on the farm, I was 4. I learned how to milk cows when I was 4 years old. By 5, I was driving the tractor. I couldn't sit on the seat and reach it. I had to stand up on it.
Nowadays, that would end up in the front.
Oh, yeah. Well, it didn't always look good when I did it either, but, but I learned. I put it in a ditch a few times, and people would have to come bail me out. So, okay. Yes, sir.
So if the tool you were talking about so I know how your father was like a log turner.
Log turner, yep.
My dad had this tool, and this might have been what he used. It's like this rod, it's kind of like the end of a shovel, but there's this thing, it's like a hook, and there's another end like that, and you kind of stab it into the log.
Yep, that's it.
And you lift it.
That's it.
I've used that before. It's
That's it.
weird.
Yep.
It's very just like you.
Okay.
Oh,
Now, women also, other chores that they would have to do, okay, they would make soap, homemade soap,
Oh, that's hard.
from lye, water, and ashes from the fireplace. That's what they made the soap from.
Wait, what was the first one?
Lye.
What's lie?
When you say
Is it-
something out of your mouth.
No, it's a chemical.
You
Yeah.
love
Thank
it?
you.
can buy it.
Really,
Okay. They would spin wool into yarn, and then into thread, so they could do sewing. Tending a garden, so the family could have a variety of vegetables. We used to do that. We'd have a huge vegetable garden, one in the spring, one in the fall, and then we would what they called canning. And you would put it, you would store it. Yeah, you would store it, and you would keep it in a nice, cool place, and you would go get whatever you wanted: green beans, beets, whatever, all year long. Then, had a corn crib that you would raise corn, and you put it in what they called a corn crib. And on Saturday nights, you would take your little .22 rifle and you would shoot the rats that was trying to get into the corn crib, because apparently they like corn. So, see, it was a win-win. We got to exterminate rats, work on your marksmanship, protect the corn. I mean, and it was entertaining.
I'm like the corn raids ended.
All right, so they also did sewing and repaired clothing. Okay, I can remember my mother and my aunts and all that. Getting what they called patterns. You would go to a store and you would buy a pattern, and then you would buy the cloth and you would make the dress. You actually made they made their own dresses and things instead of going to buy them at a store and things like that. Okay. Children, as soon as children could help, they would put to work. Children as young as 4 or 5, I told you. They helped by getting water from nearby streams, watching the fire to make sure it didn't go out, keeping the chicken and the cows from eating the crops, milking dairy cows in the morning, churning cream and butter. And that was part of every morning I would get up. My job was I went out and fed the chickens, and I slopped the hogs, And then I graduated to being able to milk the cow, one of the cows, okay? And of course, chopping wood was
I chop wood now.
that
It's
was
so
an
much
all
fun.
the way, that was a year-round ordeal. You'd go out in the spring and cut down small trees, and then you would cut them into logs about that big. And then depending on how big around that was, you'd have to take an axe and you would split it into 4
It's so much
pieces
fun.
that you could put in, because we heated the house with a wood stove, and my mom cooked on a wooden stove. I mean, that's how it got hot. It was,
Because I don't know why, but I think chopping wood is so much fun.
You ever done it by the hour?
sorry, say you haven't done it for a
You ever
long
done it by
time.
the hour?
No.
It's good for you. I will tell you that. It is good for you.
I did it for about 30 minutes.
It is good for you.
Imagine a
It's a
bowl.
workout, no doubt about it. Okay, if you do it, good for you. Okay. So anyway, and they would churn butter. I don't know how many of you ever seen those old churns
Oh,
that they
yeah,
used
the
to
big
have.
one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was. I
Yeah.
would sit and watch my grandmother. She would.
Yeah,
I
my
mean,
grandmother.
oh my goodness, and I got that old churn somewhere around the house. When children grew older, they took on more difficult tasks. Older boys often worked the farm or chopped wood. Older daughters would all help with the care for the younger siblings. Okay. Now, the education that they received, the kids received,
It's from the parents.
they went to a local one-room school house, okay? And usually they had only one teacher that taught all the grades, okay? You've probably seen this in some of the movies where they would get this group working on something and they would talk to this group over here about something, things like that. But there's only one teacher, okay? And my mom and dad actually started in a one-room schoolhouse. In fact, the first grade teacher, when they were in first grade, the teacher taught my dad, taught my mom, and then taught taught all 5 of us boys. Same teacher. Her name was Nora Shore, and she was old when I got her. So I don't, but she taught. I don't know. She taught 50, 60 years probably. I mean, she taught a long time.
That's dedication.
She never married, never had kids of her own, but she loved kids and she did a great job. She was a great person. Yes,
Can you send Van over to the office for a second, please?
I can.
Why'd you do
Leave
this?
him alone. He didn't do anything. He just got to get cleared. Okay? He didn't do anything. All right. Some settler children went to local one-room schoolhouses. Usually they had only one teacher that taught all the grades. Okay? They learned the basics such as reading, writing, math, spelling, and a little bit of history. When they wrote, they didn't have paper. They had slates. Okay? And they would write on those and hold the answer up and then erase it, and then they would write, the next answer down and stuff like that. It was kind of like you guys in the whiteboards, okay? If you ever get to use those, kind of something like that. The children usually went to school in the winter and the summer, but stayed home to help on the farm during planting and harvesting season, spring and autumn. When I was growing up, Miss Weller and I was talking about this outside. In fact, when I was growing up, it was not uncommon for us to delay the start of school because it was hunting season.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, seriously.
That's what happens in Rascal.
Yeah, seriously. Okay? So it was not uncommon. Entertainment. Although the pioneers worked most of the time, they would occasionally get together for a dance or a picnic. They would have things what they called barn raisings, where they would people would come from all around to help build a barn, and then when they finished it,
Pick it up.
they would have a dance and a picnic and things like that to kind of celebrate, and that was the entertainment. And somebody would usually play fiddles, maybe an accordion, something like that, and they would dance and have fun. So that was the entertainment. Yes, Marty.
I read this book, and it's one of the Little House on the Prairie books. It talked about how your teacher, for a week, would come to your house and live with you. Is that true?
If they did not, tell them about where did the teacher live. If they had a one-room schoolhouse, a lot of times they have a little room on the back of that, and that is where the teacher lived, because most of them was not married at that point in time. They were single
All the single
women, so they actually would live in the back of the schoolhouse, in a little room. Okay, nothing fancy, of course, just you know, a bed and probably a stove, a chair, something of that nature. That was about it. Okay? Yes, sir.
It got him by.
What age did you start hunting with your brothers or dad or whatever?
Age 3.
No, actually, I think I was like 8 when I actually got to go out with a real, honest to goodness firearm.
I'm probably gonna
Eight?
go hunting a couple-
Okay? But you got to understand, I grew up different times than you guys. Okay? When I was in high school, if you had a vehicle, it was a pickup, an old pickup, and you had a gun rack in the back, and you carried your shotgun or a rifle or something in that all the time, and you went up and parked it right in the school parking lot. No one messed with it. Everybody understood that's a real piece of equipment. You didn't play with it. It wasn't a toy. Above the door and the house I grew up in, every one of them had a double gun rack, and every one of them had 2 guns in it, and they were loaded.
Ready to fire.
Yeah, but we knew you didn't play with them. They weren't toys. Okay, different time. Okay.
Yeah, now-
Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong. Just